going to start drawing in just a little bit, but I wanted to remind you of a couple of things. You have a kneaded eraser that we used for the charcoal drawing, and so it has charcoal in it. You can still use it for this drawing, but that's why it's called a kneaded eraser. You must knead all that charcoal away. I could say you need to knead the charcoal away, or it's not going to work very well. It's going to smear charcoal on it. Secondly, I wanted to talk about the pencils. I gave you 3 of them. One is an H, and 2 of them are B's, a 2B and a 4B. Whenever you see that number there, B stands for black. I don't know why it isn't an S for soft, but it is B for black. And 2 means that it's the second level of black. The 4 would mean it's the 4th level of black. The higher the number, the more that little B or the H would be represented. So in other words, 2B is dark, but not as dark as a 4B, and it's not as dark as a 6B, and so on. Same thing with H. H actually does stand for hard, which makes sense. So I think I just gave you an H pencil, not a 2H. And so the higher the number, the harder that pencil would be. H's are kind of tricky pencils because you think, oh, they're hard, so they're not going to make a heavy line. But sometimes you don't want to use an H because they can tend to score into the paper, and then you make a little river down your paper that you don't want. So that's why I only use H's for just a tiny little bit of value if I want just a little bit of tone. Lastly, I want to talk about hair a little bit. You don't want to make a heavy line around where the hair is because hair grows out of the scalp and the skin. So if you make a heavy line, it's going to look like a wig. So you want to make it very soft when it comes out at the places where it connects to the scalp. So I'm going to go ahead and revert this now to time lapse, and then I will chat in between. Before I continue, I just want to talk about a couple of things that we have talked about before, but just to remind you, I've already mentioned that the hair grows out of the scalp. Hair is one of the things that people think, oh, that's too hard to draw. Just shade the direction the hair is going, look to see where the lights and the darks fall. He has salt and pepper hair, so in some places I'm not going to put any shading at all. I'm going to put the shadow underneath, but the hair itself is going to stay pretty light. Also, don't be afraid to continue to make corrections. I don't really care for what I'm doing with the glasses here, so I'm going to have to come back in. I think I've made them too small. But if I had begun by making the glasses completely dark right now, I couldn't make those corrections. So that's why it's so important to remember light until right. Also, we've talked about this before, but the nostril does not sit on the edge of the nose. His nose has kind of a blunt area here, so I don't have the nostril quite right yet, but I'll come back there and fix it. I'm beginning to put a little shading in, but not so much that I can't change it. Also, with the eye, you may be able to see the eye. In fact, you probably will be able to see the eye in your drawing much better because most people don't have glasses on. But don't put what is not there. We have a tendency to draw the eye in a very symbolic manner. If I were to draw what really looked like an eye here and add the whites and the dark part, it's not going to look correct because it's in shadow. And you will see on your drawing as well, especially the whites of the eyes are not going to be white. So compare it to where you see the strongest highlight, and you'll see they're not white at all. Speaking of highlights, this particular drawing has lighting from a window that you can't see in the picture, but it's casting light on his face. That means that these areas right here are going to be light. So I'm going to put some shading back there, and you won't really see these lines once I'm done. They're just going to be in the shadow. But sometimes you have 2 areas, and we've mentioned this before, that are the same value between the background and the foreground. Sometimes you have to put just a little bit of a line in there, just a little gestural line to show where that edge is to give people a hint. Lastly, on this particular part, I want to talk about the lips. We did mention this before, but sometimes lips don't have a lot of value in them. They might just be just a little bit of tonal difference. In this case, his upper lip has a shadow on it, but his lower lip doesn't really have a lot of color at all. There's going to be a little texture there, but the shadow underneath really defines that lip more than the shading of the actual lips themselves will. Very important, the only part that is a true contour is the opening of the mouth. Everything else is just going to be a little bit of a value difference. So this is the only part that's going to be a real line. The exception to that might be if you were drawing somebody who had a lot of lipstick on, but for the samples I've given you, nobody does, so don't give them big, what look like wax lips. They need to be soft. As I said, don't be afraid to make corrections because that's going to be very important. You'll see as I'm drawing, I come back in with my kneaded eraser quite a bit to make some corrections and changes and just refine what I already have there. One more last thing I didn't think about. Collars are tended to be drawn symbolically. Don't think of it as a collar. Just look at it as a puzzle piece. See how this shape comes in and line it up the way that it actually needs to go. Otherwise, we make these little triangular things that look like cartoon collars. As well, look for where the shoulders hit. Now, we think shoulders are down here, but in this case, look where his shoulder comes out. It's very high. Same thing as over here, not quite as high as there because you're seeing it at a different angle. But the collar comes here, and then the shoulder is going to be very close because remember, shoulders start at the pit of the neck. Got a ways to go, but I've made some progress. As you can see, I have begun to put the little background value in there. I did that because I wanted this light area to be able to show a little bit more while I'm working so it doesn't confuse me. Also, you might note that the nose looks kind of gray right now, but that's because I'm trying to figure out the subtle differences in the values in the nose. That's going to be the case everywhere. So as when we've always done when we are drawing our projects, you want to look for that subtle value difference. So in other words, I'm not going to just shade in this whole area with one value. Same thing with the nose. There's going to be a little bit of darks and lights that play a little bit differently next to each other. Also, I want to talk about things such as wrinkles and folds. You're all young because you're all teenagers and you're not going to have as many. But when somebody gets a little bit older, they are going to have more definition in their face. You want to put those in, but don't make them look like they're chiseled in as though the person is marble. So you want to soften those areas a little bit. The same would be true if perhaps somebody had a birthmark or a wart or something. You're going to underemphasize them. If it's something that's temporary, you don't put it on at all. So for example, if somebody has a big pimple, you're not going to draw that because it's not permanent. But if it is something that's permanent on there, like maybe a little beauty mark, you're going to put it in, but you don't make it look like a gigantic witch wart. You're going to make it really, really soft. So when I get to Mr. Fenderson's forehead, he does have some lines in there, and I do need to put him on there because it's going to express his person, his expression, who he is, but I'm not going to just chisel them in. They're going to be really, really soft so that you give the appearance of the person, but in a kind and flattering way. So I'm only going to work on this about the same amount of time as you are going to work on it, so I'm giving you about 3 hours per drawing. So again, you're going to have a little bit of extra time if you want to refine it beyond that, but I want to try to stick within that amount of time because it's very similar to what a college class would be when we're working in studio, where you'd have a period of about 3 hours to finish a piece.